The Working Audio Tools podcast is the place where we discuss all things mixing. We dabble with mastering and production and songwriting elements as well, because as we know, that all drastically affects what we do as mix engineers. Paul Third and I are well on our way to becoming full-time mix engineers at this stage, with both of us getting more clients regularly, which is amazing. And we've been analysing the videos we've done. The mix episodes that we've done are pretty good. We like them. It keeps us on our toes. It keeps us pushing ourselves forward, but they don't seem to go down massively well with the audience. But thank you for those guys who do tune in and watch them. But the other stuff that does go well is stuff like we think what we have today, which should be a good episode for you all, which is going to be final mix checks that you have to go through before you send things out to clients, because we've all been there when we've done the absolute classic printing a mix, rushing out of the studio, listening to it on the way home, having sent it to the client only to realise, we left the headphone EQ on. Yep. So it sounds all weird. What did you have in mind for mix checks, Paul? What inspired this episode for you?
Okay, what inspired this week's episode was last week's mix comparison. So Ed noticed something that I'd completely missed. And long story short, there was Sibilance. And Ed was like, that doesn't normally sound like you. You normally have that managed. And then it was a thing with fresh pair of ears. I focused on the Sibilance, and all of a sudden I thought, yeah, there's certain parts of this that very fast little bits. And I got away with it because nobody commented on the video, which was quite funny. But I knew it was there, and after listening to Ed's, he'd controlled the Sibilance quite well. And there's been times that I've done that where, I've been redoing a vocal, or, I've just thought, right, okay, I'll need to redo this, whatever. And there's a certain part of the process that I normally do that I miss. And normally I always use Emra's like linear de-esser and vocal shaper at the end. And then I normally have a bit of soothe as well at the very end, just to kind of tuck in certain like upper kind of harsh frequencies, just very light. And I didn't do it. I just was like in a rush, and I thought, and I was focusing on certain parts of the mix that I wanted to prioritise. And whilst I was prioritising, I completely forgot about the S's and didn't even notice them. And it just goes to show that when you focus so much on one part of the mix, everything can kind of just blur, and you sit back with a fresh pair of ears and go, holy shit, like, how did I miss that? And it's important to understand these things, because as a professional, the last thing you want is your client telling you something that you should have picked up on. And and I fixed it, and it was like a 2-second fix, and I don't think any has noticed it anyway, which is good, but it does sound better. So I did like a one more version, sent it to Ed, and he's like, yeah, maybe you've slightly done the DS in a little bit too much in certain parts, but Paul, it's nothing to worry about. The vocal sounds better, like, that's it, job done, happy days. So yeah, I'd say a Sibilance check is always a good one, especially if you're needing to add top end to vocals, and you can sometimes get excited, and if you focus too much on how much top end you've got in that vocal, you can just completely forget that you need a de-esser after it. Quite common. What about you?
Good practice. Right. The absolute first thing I do is press save.
Yeah, that's a fucking good one, yeah. 100%, man. 100%.
I left my computer today to go to the gym, and left it on, left Pro Tools open because I was going to come back to it, and it crashed thanks to a certain popular plugin company. Comment with your guesses which company that is, and we will not reply. Waves. To try and be diplomatic. I didn't say a word, but correct. And then have a sip of some water, stand up, stretch, move around, get the blood flowing to the ears, stay hydrated, and if need be, go and make a cup of tea just to have a break, rest the ears, go outside, get out of this soundproof, windowless box in which I'm institutionalizing myself from society, and go and have a conversation and listen to some other frequencies. The one thing I do like to do before sending a mix out, partly because this is usually on my master bus anyway, but I also definitely need to do it, which is check the EQ in Ozone. So I will set Ozone to do its thing. I'll immediately delete the maximizer module. That thing just shouldn't exist. And then I'll audition each one, bring back the clarity, bring back the stability setting, audition the impact, because sometimes that does things I don't like, audition the Imaging, because sometimes that does things I don't like. And then ultimately check the EQ. And if there's anything drastically wrong, and now I feel like I'm usually getting it. I mean, if it's usually it's flat. If it picks up the right genre, that's another thing.
I was waiting to say that. Right genre. Make sure that it's got the right genre.
Because that can really fuck you.
Yeah, 100%.
So usually if it's got the right genre, I'm usually in the ballpark. Again, if there's... I actually learned quite a valuable lesson this week. There was something in the mix I did the other day. I forget which one. And it was telling me that the mid-range was too prominent at about 500 hertz. So it took out a dB, I think it was. I was like, yeah, whatever. Ignored it. Turned it off. I was like, sounds good in here. And then I put it in my van. And interestingly, it was exactly that area where it was just a bit muddy. I was like, okay, maybe Ozone's onto something.
Yeah.
So I came back in and then just went through a few things and dialed a few things back, did the check again, and it was fine. So that's a very useful tool. And also leaving Ozone on does just, it's kind of like cheating it in places. It just tucks things in and out and yeah.
And as we are on isotope, I always recommend tonal balance. I always check tonal balance at the end. I normally do check it periodically throughout the mix, but I never send the mix out without checking tonal balance, just for a sanity check. Like, I don't lean so much into it, but it dictates everything that I do. But normally I find if I go to the pop target, and normally if I find the low ends right, and I see that kind of line pretty much like going down the trajectory of where it needs to be, and it's quite good for the high end as well. Because normally what I've found is any time I've thought the mix sounds okay, and then again, if there's maybe been an excess of maybe 10k or something like that, I've sent it to Marcel and he's like, yeah, Paul, there's an excess of whatever, you've maybe brightened up something too much, there's a transient or a hi-hat or something, that top end transient you've left there. Then I'm like, bastard, how did I miss that? And that's where tonal balance can come in. So because these can kind of be quite good tools just to kind of almost have somebody on your shoulder just going, you overdid that, mate. Maybe you might have tucked that down a little bit. You know what I mean? Especially if you've got maybe a little bit too exuberant with the low end. Because normally I find with a low end, if it is too much, isotope will tell you. But again, make sure you've got it on the right target. But I normally find the pop one normally is like 8 times out of 10. Bang on. If you're doing country and stuff like that, then it's quite important to check them out as well. But another thing I always do to counterbalance that as well is use my ears as well as my eyes. So I'll always have references. So whilst I'm always referencing with mixes whilst I'm in the mix, I always do before I send it off, just again check the references and just be like, right, okay, tonally, how are these things kind of sitting? If it's a country mix, have I maybe made it a little bit too modern, maybe a bit too bright? And especially the rough. Again, always go back to the rough, because you could easily do this thing where you get into it and you've like added on X, Y, and Z and you're pumped about it. You've not taken a 15-minute break to freshen up your ears. Sometimes, just going to the rough is, enough for you to say, okay, I've now moved very, 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 very far away from the rough now. Okay, I need to take that back and zone yourself in. So a lot of this stuff is things really you should be doing whilst you're mixing, so you don't let yourself go too far in the first place. But at least if you check it at the end, it's that sanity check. So that's what I do. Is there anything else that you like to do at the end of the mixes?
Yeah, there's a few things, but just to reiterate, checking the reference is definitely essential. And what I've noticed when I've had the pleasure of watching MSM engineer, is he's referencing the rough mix literally every 5 minutes at most. He probably doesn't go 4 or 5 changes without checking it.
Yeah.
And he's having breaks every 15 minutes and laying on his sofa. And yeah, then my final checks are basically my consumer device translation checks. So the mobile phone in vertical and horizontal, because some phones, the new iPhones somehow deliver like a stereo image in vertical mode, whereas it used to be kind of mono and then there'd be definitely stereo sideways. I guess it's a little bit more stereo, but it's not as obvious as it used to be. So that's a good check, because for me, if there's a problem with the low end or too much saturation, that will be really audible on phones. It doesn't matter how good the speakers get. Look at the size of them.
Yeah, totally.
Tiny little speakers. They're always going to crap out if they're overloaded at one end or the other. Then it's go to the AirPods, because a lot of people are listening on those. Then it's the Anchor soundbar. this little thing. Hey, which sounds crap, but the reason it's good is because it limits itself and craps out at certain frequencies, and if anything's popping out or any balances are too off, or like, there'll be a snare drum frequency that pops out too much. So what we do have to be careful with, though, as we discussed, I think last week, is not getting bogged down into translation paralysis, testing on too many systems. That is something I'm aware of. So it's really a check, and if anything's obvious, maybe half a dB, or cutting a specific frequency out. And then final two are checking your headphone EQ is off, which I'm doing anyway before I'm going to mix to mobile, which I use for streaming to my phone, from which I then go to my AirPods and the Anchor soundbar. And then final check of LUFS levels.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a huge one. Because I think what I've always found is that sometimes when you're mixing, and again, depending on your gain staging, if you're, on the tracks and you're pushing the tracks, and then all of a sudden you've not really realised that, you've then went into the mix bus a little bit too hot, and then again, which means that you're going into your limiter a little bit too hot. And at the end of the day, if it sounds good, it sounds good. But I always like to check the LUFS levels just so I'm aware, okay, maybe I could back this off a little bit and get a little bit more dynamic range. Sometimes you're like, yeah, you can get into it and it sounds good, and if it sounds good, it sounds good. But when it comes to pushing into a limiter, if you can, maybe bring it back a little bit and not do as much and lose a little bit of level, and it sounds a little bit better because you've got the dynamic range, then it's worth a check to kind of know if you're overdoing stuff. Because there might be a part in the track, especially in a chorus, you push it and you're like, yeah, I've not realised that the low end's getting choked in the chorus because everything kind of raises up. So I think checking your gain staging is quite important. Just checking the measures at the level, What I normally do is I normally go to the end console, the Brits and end console, because I've got all the routing and the plugins. Then I've got the master bus instance. That's got a VU on it. So I always go into that and I always gain stage my 2-bus all the time the same way. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to go into the Brits and too hard, because then I'm going to start soft clipping, which can have a sound, but I don't like it that much. I just like to have it kind of just about 0 VU, sometimes maybe dipping into the red. And then again, double checking God particle, just making sure that your 2-bus, everything is gain staged correctly, because there might be a quick optimization that you can make that you've not noticed, and you might be going into something too hot. So yeah, that's one thing. And I do the same as Ed, where I do the reference checks. So because I'm on headphones so much, what I do is I'll then always check on the speakers. So I'll go to the speakers and I'll go, right, okay, and the angry boxes as well, because they give me such a different representation.
Oh, great for referencing.
No tops,
really
just no tops, no bass, just like pure fucking mid-range. So it's a good check for that. And again, all I'm doing is I'm just checking big picture. I'm just like, does everything still make sense? But if something's really glaring to me, then I'm like, okay, I need to double check that. And it is just all quick double checks. And then if necessary, if I've got time, I may go to real phones, and I may just like get on the AllOS 5X and I'll check what Ed's talking about with the phones, the laptops, and the cars and the bars, clubs and stuff. I might just do certain little checks like that. But I find myself doing that less, because as Ed talks about, you don't want to have system paralysis. Just a few references that you trust. If you've got, like, for example, if I'm starting say on the Nanos, and then ARRI Organics, MX4s, and then I'm checking on the MTM Precisions, and then again I check on the Angry Boxes. Fucking hell, if it all sounds good on that, then what am I worried about? If everything sounds right on that, it should be okay. So yeah, I think it's just always about a sanity check and a quality check. But I was trying to think earlier if there was certain things that we get over exuberant about that we don't double check. And I think another one, it's kind of similar to Sibilance, could be reverbs. There's loads of mixes, especially on headphones, that I've done, especially earlier in my journey, where I was so focused and into headphones, I would almost let the headphone mix win. And then sometimes I would get over exuberant with the ambience and the reverbs and delays. Then Ed would hear it on his speakers and be like, whoa, like, I know this sounds great on headphones, but fucking, it's like Wembley Stadium, Paul. Fuck, calm it down.
I'm never going to live that comment down, am I?
I know. It always sticks in me, Paul Third at Wembley Stadium. But, it's one of those things that it's easy to lose track. And I think this episode's more about thinking about the things where you can let yourself, you lead yourself astray because you're not taking breaks. Like, all of this is genuinely avoidable by just taking breaks. And it's like, I know some people that will, I don't do this, but I know people, and I could probably do it if I wanted to, but I know some people that not only take breaks, but switch to another reference. So say like they're mixing on something for 15, 20 minutes. They'll go, right, I'll then take a 5-minute break. But see, when I come back, I'm away to switch to the speakers. And then see, I'll do another 15, 20 minutes. And then, I'll take a 5-minute break. I'll go with my headphones.
I see problems with that.
I personally see that. I know 2 mixers that do it. And it works for them, fair enough. But yeah, so I think it's just all about not allowing your mind to get used to the sim that you're going towards. That's like what all these mix checks are about. But I mean, I think all this stuff was a little bit maybe more important kind of maybe like 5-10 years ago. I mean, especially in the analog days, could you imagine the mix checks you would need to do for an analog mix? Imagine like making sure that everything is written down, all your recall notes. Because if you imagine you've got the assistant and you say, yeah, Michael, remember recall notes. Remember, they probably are going to come back for feedback. And remember, we doing fucking Van Halen next week. You just remember, Michael, you got it?
Yeah,
Michael,
yeah.
you got it? Comes back for the recall. It's like, yeah, bass up a little bit, yeah. Michael, where's the recall notes? I didn't do them. Snookered. That's a whole new fucking mix, you know what I mean?
And even things like measuring the temperature of the desk in the room, because over the course of the day they would get so much hotter. So if you printed a mix in the morning, it's going to sound different to the one in the evening. Mad stuff like that. I don't have so much of that with the Wes audio gear, but I've tracked vocals on with the rear Verimute tube compressors that just sound so thick and beefy. But over a 3-hour recording session, I was using one, and it got so hot after about 2.5 hours. I was like, something's changed, man. Can't figure out what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that. It heated up, and it was oversaturating. So I swapped to another one.
Another one that just popped into my head there, because I know it's happened to me once or twice, is, I don't ever advise this. Sometimes it happens, right? Is if you are using a plugin that you're demoing in a session, always be very careful and mindful that if you need to go back to this and it's a demo and you've not bought it and it's fucking an integral part of whatever it is, you go back to that and the session's not there, the plugins are not there. That happened to me on this album that I've been working with a client. I think I spoke about it a couple of weeks ago. But because we've been at it for so long, like a long time, I had the Apollo at the time, I had the Apollo X6, which means I had all the UAD plugins on. And then we came back to it, and I was like, oh no, it was a whole remix. And I said to him, I was like, I know you maybe only wanted 3 kind of things changed, but I'm sorry, man, I'm going to have to do a full remix. Not that he was bothered, because it was me. It was my fault. And I was like, fuck, I'm going to have to remix this now. And it took us half a day, and I did it. But actually, no, I'll tell a lie. It wasn't half a day. It was 2 hours, because I remember my wife was like, you said you were only going to be there half an hour. And she phoned me. She's like, Paul, where are you? It's like, yeah. Did you get distracted again? I was like, no, at this time I genuinely didn't get distracted. Genuinely. And I told her, and I was just like, it took me, what should have been half an hour, took me 2 hours, and it was a remix, because I still had the plugins. I wasn't at fucking all UAD, but that has happened to a few people in the past, where it could be you've worked with a client, and then for whatever reason they take ages on it, come back, and then, I've not got that plugin, and then you send it back to them. Actually, I know a few engineers have told me stories where, for whatever reason, if it's like they've changed a piece of outboard, or a piece of, I remember somebody's piece of outboard broke, and they were like, yeah, they won't notice it. And because it was on the vocal, the client came back to them and said, yeah, the vocal's different.
I know the story you're talking about, yeah.
And he was like, oh shit. And I can't remember what happened. I can't remember I think he managed to fix it in the end. But like, stuff like that can happen.
I mean that's a terrifyingly discernible client if they're hearing
totally
whatever a specific piece of analog is doing. Yeah. I mean, one thing I thought that we should check all the way through is crest factor.
Right.
Which is something I've really been paying more attention to recently. And it really is useful, because like last week's mix, I had the kick a bit too loud, which a few people pointed out, which was kind of obvious. I very much agreed with those comments. I may not have had that if I'd been monitoring the crest factor in Flatline or in any limiting plugin, but I find Flatline quite useful for that with the clip hybrid and limiting setting. That's a good plugin.
Yep, very good. That's what I use a lot of times for my main clipper because it's really clean, like super, super clean. And I like to use that quite a lot.
Yeah.
I was using it. Honestly, that was my main limiter. I went from Smart Limit and then I went to Flatline. And then Master Plan came and I was like,
Oh yeah, Master Plan's on my mix bus, and I use it in mastering. What decibel output loudness? It's the loud dial in the middle, isn't it? Do you default mix into? I set it to 4 decibels.
Yeah, I think mine's is about the same because obviously I've got a certain set gain stage, as I talked about before. So I normally have the mix around -11. That's normally where I tend to mix into. Because I remember I asked Emra years ago, and I said, if you were to pick an average like LUFS level you think is where you can start getting to that loudness where you're not really compromising, he was like, probably -11, Paul. I think -11 is where you can get it to where you're not really hearing the adverse effects of the limiting, and it still seems pretty good. I've spoken to many mixers, even mastering engineers, that have told me -11, -10, once you start getting above that, you're then having to do your craft, your skill as a mastering engineer. You're then having to really work at things to get it sounding kind of the same. Where you can, even have found it, push it, even sometimes -10, 11, you don't really notice it. You know what I mean? So yeah, I do normally tend to mix into that just so I've got a set loudness. And that's probably another thing to check is, we did mention LUFS, but I spoke about it from another point in terms of pushing the limiter too hot and maybe gain staging on the 2 bus. But just overall your LUFS, like, as everybody always tells us, and Anthony Vilchis talked about this, always make sure you're louder than the rough. So that is definitely something to bear in mind, is that before you send that to the client, bear in mind they've got their rough at a set loudness. And he's like, all the time, always make sure that you're louder. So that's probably a very important check. But yeah, that comment really got me, Ed, because I could imagine myself raging that I've got such in my opinion, an amazing mix. But for whatever reason, the client set me like a -5 LUFS rough. And I'm like, I've got to ruin this now. I've got to ruin this for the sake of fucking matching your fucking loudness. That would honestly kill me. That would devastate me. And I was speaking to lots of mixers and they're like, welcome to the industry, Paul. And that's why you work with certain producers. That's why you work with certain people, so we don't get to those stages.
I mean, there's not many people who can get to -5. That's quite extreme.
Oh, you can if you just get the limiter.
There's the cheap way of doing it, and it's just going to sound horrendous. But at that point, if it's that extreme, maybe that's time for a conversation.
Yeah.
Hey man, do you really? Let's have a listen to what I've done at -8, and then have a listen to what you've done, or have a listen to another version that I've printed for you at -4. You know.
Or even know what you could do. Probably would be easier. Just say, look, know what I've done. I've taken your rough, and then what I've done is I've printed them both together side by side. So mine is going to be yours. Or either, no, you can just send 2 separate files and just say, I've brought your mix down to the level that I feel is good for this mix. So then that way, when they listen to their rough, their loudness isn't getting in the way. You're almost like kind of telling them, no, like, let's scrap the rough you had. Nothing's changed in your rough. Just the level. And then that way they can hear, there's no actual loudness, but what they're going to hear hopefully is that, wow, this mix sounds louder and dynamic and open, this sounds crushed and fucking, pinned. And that way you can maybe take the loudness out of the equation. Don't know, there's ways probably around it.
Slightly risky territory playing around with the rough, but your point is valid. And
because you're just bringing them the volume, so it's already printed, so you're just bringing them the volume here.
Yeah, and going back to LUFS, I would typically aim for -10, but I often in the past have ended up being at -9. I don't find it difficult to get to -8, but that's because I've not necessarily been This was before I was keeping an eye on Crest factor and limiting the kick, bass, and then drum and bass buses, which I now do, which is a technique I got from your fair self. And it does help. So, yeah, I think 11's a little bit low, but I understand Emra's point is that threshold where you're getting a pure mix before any limiting is imposing itself on the mix.
And even if it is, you're hardly noticing it. It's maybe just the odd peak.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I feel like 10's a round number because OCD kicks in really annoying fucking ways. And
what? That's something we've never spoke about here. And I've not got OCD, but Jesus, I always find myself...
Excuse me, can we not lie to our audience, please? That is absolute bullshit.
I do not have OCD.
You don't have OCD?
Yeah, 100%. I don't have OCD. Remember, I've got an autism diagnosis. I have ADD, but I do not have OCD. Like, there's so many things in my life that genuinely I'm like...
Okay, maybe just a high level of attention to detail, and maybe I've blurred the lines between the two. Okay,
correct, yes. I definitely don't have OCD. My father-in-law has OCD, and that is crippling. Like, I'm glad I don't have OCD. It could be mentally crippling. And there's times that I'm just like, I'll just let you do your own thing there, John. It's like, you do what you need to do.
Being OCD in a live sound engineer is painful sometimes. Being OCD in loading a van, luckily, I'm good at Tetris, not so painful. Being OCD and decorating a new flat and buying furnishings for it, that's been testing.
Yeah, but also, if I think about little kind of really pernickety things, I'm just trying to think like very, very small details. Even maybe things just like correctly naming the files. You know what I mean? Just making sure that you've not got version V16. Don't send the client that. It's like, yeah, so you remember you said how, you get the mix done in a day. Yeah, it's just been 3 days. Oh, yeah, I had such and such. I had a few mixes come in. So your song, version 16. Like, fucking 16 versions? Jesus Christ. I know, you know, just wee things, making sure you've got them labelled correctly, make sure the song's labelled correctly. So again, if you're mastering an album, mixing an album, you're making sure that all the songs are labelled correctly and stuff, wee things like that. Because again,
folded and all that.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't think I would get to that point in our part of the world, because you go back to the artist. But I take it there's maybe been times where things have been moving so fast paced. There's been an album in the mixer or mastering engineers incorrectly like typed in the name of the song, got confused, typed in the wrong one, and then it's went to Spotify, and then fucking the wrong fucking song titles went up. Imagine it's happened, and that would fuck off an artist. That would piss me off if I was an artist. And there's just things, it's just really
the mastering
good
engineer
is it?
Probably not going to be uploading it. That'd be where the manager or the A&R is stepping in. But yeah, I've experienced things where multiple people have missed the dumbest stuff. Yeah.
And it does matter, does it? In terms of you're being as a professional, and this is something we always talk about, is that you need to see yourself as a business, and everything has got to be done in a professional manner. So when I do send like files out, I do always make sure that I go in and I do always correctly label them, and you know what I mean, I make sure the song title's right, I check the spelling, I'll put the artist's name in it and stuff, just so it doesn't become like a clusterfuck of this random files, you know what I mean?
And
song
spelling
1,
people's
version
names
2,
and spelling people's names with capital letters. It's a very small detail, but it's a matter of respect, I think. You touched on something that I had to tell this story. It is also worth, when you've printed a mix in Pro Tools or you bounce something, it is always worth scanning through and checking. Partly because we had this on the podcast where we had 1 or 2 episodes go onto streaming and they were cutting off after 15 minutes because the way I was bouncing them in Final Cut meant I was overloading the computer and it wasn't doing the MP3 version properly. So I now scan through every episode, just click through it. But with a mix, I had some analog routing going, and I learned this the hard way in Logic, but it also does it in Pro Tools, and I know it does it in Pro Tools because I checked, having had this experience in Logic, where when you freeze channels at the end of a mix to save CPU, for me, it hasn't worked with live analog I/O channels. And I sent a mix out. I just thought, fine, freeze everything, send it out, sounds good. sent the mix out. And the mix feedback, bear in mind, this was a group with two producers, the writer, the manager, and I think an A&R guy, so something like that. The comments back were, the vocals sound a bit distant, sound quite heavy in reverb, and they're quite quiet. I was like, oh, that's not right. Listened to it. The lead vocal hadn't printed. I mean, I have never... I have looked like a dickhead on many occasions. This was up there in my top 5 bell injury activities. So, yeah, check. Just, it's simple. I mean, no one does it, because if it works, it should work. But, yeah, if you're freezing files, that is a top tip. Check.
Yeah, look, it's just always listen to it after you've exported it. I always listen to the song as soon as I've exported it. It's the first thing I do, as soon as it's exported. Because what I'm doing is I'm double checking that there's maybe something in the DAW that's maybe went awry. Because at the end of the day, like as we talked about speaker correction, again, if you've got SonarWorks or Arc 4 and you're not using the box, then it's quite easy to leave that on. In Studio One, I don't have that issue because I've got the listen bus, so I could leave all that stuff on and it doesn't affect the print or the export, the bounce. So, I mean, even just things like fades could be a thing where you've forgotten to do a fade. You know what I mean? And it's because that's just wee things that you forget that that you're meant to do. Again, a mastering engineer could do it, but if you're, mixing and mastering, then if you don't forget the fade, then that's a level of unprofessionalism professionalism. I can't say that, professionalism as well, where you just let the song cut out and you're meant to fade it out. I've done that a few times where I've just like completely forgot about the fade, and then you've just got this bit where the tone kind of falls out and then just stops. And I don't even pay much attention to it, and I think, fuck, I should have faded that out. It's all wee things, and I think the more that you get the wee things right, the more that they add up to impress the client. Because I know it's like, look, you forget a fade, they're like, oh, can you do that fade? No problem. But you imagine you had lots of these wee things. That's when the client starts to go, wait, so you got no fades, you forgot to do that, the lead vocal's no in it. I could hear the sibilance off the reverb in the vocal take. You're missing that because you use a bit of analog gear and that didn't out properly. It's overly limited. Why is that? Oh, and it sounds really strange. Like it's like there's like a really phasey mess on it. Oh yeah, so yeah, I forgot to take the speaker correction off, and that didn't print right. I forgot to do the fade. Yeah, oh yeah, the analog stuff. Yeah, that something happened there. They're like, right, okay. So before I even give you feedback on that, you'll have to fix all that stuff first, and it's just not professional, is it? You just need to get it right off the bat as much as you can.
Yeah, but I mean, we all have to remember that we are human, and sometimes
100%,
life does get in the way. We are distracted and we are in a rush, and most people, in my experience, are pretty cool. Like, I've sent something out and been like, right, hold that. I've realised I made a mistake. I'll send you another one in 10 minutes, and they're like, yeah, no worries. So as long as you communicate, yeah.
Yeah, because I think that would be, that's a really, really, really big thing, is that if you do fuck up, make sure that no matter what you're doing, you stop and you amend that quickly.
Yeah.
Like, if you make a fuck up and then you're like, oh yeah, I'm really sorry. Yeah, I've got such and such to do. Yeah, I'll get it to you in a couple of days. They'll be like, if you would have got it right in the first place, then I would have had the mix that I wanted. You know what I mean? So if you make the fuck up, then you've got to stop what you're doing and fix it. Especially if it's only like a 10-second thing, fucking just do it. And you know what I mean? Don't fuck about the client.
If you don't have an in-house mastering engineer like we're fortunate enough to have with Marcel at Actu Make with the Working Audio Tools, DistroKid have you covered. For just $99 a year, you can buy unlimited mastering for all of your tracks in tandem with unlimited releases via DistroKid. Mixair from DistroKid uses AI technology to measure the EQ and the dynamics of your track and then present you with numerous options to tweak and customize your master. You can flip between the original and the generic mastered option.
Blame it on the whiskey, blame it on the bad weed.
So instantly we can hear that's making the track louder, and it's also slightly flattening the EQ, bringing in a little bit more of the mid-range and of course the top end. We can adjust the intensity, which is how much compression and limiting is being applied to the track.
Blame it on the only thing you've ever seen. Run and tell your mother. blame it on your brother.
I think somewhere in the middle works for this track. And the EQ options are self-explanatory. We can make the track effectively duller or brighter.
Just ain't right. All you do is lie. All you do is try to deny. All you do is lie. Even when you know it just ain't right. All you do is lie.
Download your mastered track and release it as easily as you do all of your other unlimited uploads. Get 30% off your DistroKid subscription using the WorkingAudioTools VIP link below.
It's amazing all the stuff you think about, Ed. Like, we started this thinking really big things. And when you think about it, there are so many little things that can go wrong. And it's just not being thorough. So in regards to trying to make this not happen, the reason this all came about is because I said to Ed, I wonder if we should have like a little checklist just for us in the meantime, where you just kind of look at it and go, right, okay, sibilance check. Have you got speaker correction check. There can just lots and lots of things just to kind of go in your head, done that, yeah, done that. Oh, fuck, I forgot that, right? Done. And then you get into a point where it becomes muscle memory and you just don't need that piece of paper anymore. Don't know if that's a good idea.
What we should do, Paul, is the WorkingAudioTools downloadable PDF. I'll tell you what, have we still got our channel members thing?
Yeah, we do, yeah.
Right. If you become a channel member, we'll give you the PDF.
Yeah, and Ed's going to make it because I'm not doing
it. Yeah.
Your idea.
With capital letters and punctuation.
Yeah, I'll be very, very well punctuated, ladies and gentlemen, them days. But yeah, I think, honestly, I think that's it. If you have anything that you think we have glaringly missed, it's something, honestly, there'll be something obvious.
There'll be something
obvious that we've missed in this episode. But obviously, leave your comments down below. And again, leave stories. I always like when people leave stories and humbling moments that they've had where something's went horribly wrong. Because at the end of the day, it's done now. You know what I mean? We can all laugh about it now. Yeah, there you go. My name's Paul Third. Said Thorne. Have you got anything to say before we go, Ed? Or is it just, it's been emotional and we're ready to go?
It has been emotional. I've enjoyed that episode. But I would also like to ask the audience to ask us more questions in the comments. Because that's quite useful for us to gauge what you guys want and what you want to know from us and about us. So yeah, please ask away in the comments and leave us your stories, as Paul said. There's something now that's going to be so glaringly obvious we've left out.
100%.
I mean, besides actually email. Well, that's a good one. The amount of times I've printed something and meant to send it to myself so I can listen to it at home overnight, and I've locked the studio and I've walked up the road and I'm like, I didn't fucking email it to myself, did I?
Yeah, and you can't listen to it, yeah.
Or upload it to the drive and I can't listen to it. So, yeah, anyway, on that blonde bombshell, we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.